Psychoanalysis and homeopathy. Casual and phenomenological systems and the potential world touching the unknown truth. Namaste. Conversation today is deep, heavy, and philosophical into the nature of foundations of healing systems and the specific context in that of homeopathy. If this was not enough, we add some more cargo to the camel with a visit to the world of the potential world. Guide in conversation with us is Dr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So, can we start off with why this interface between homeopathy and psychotherapy? Why is it so interesting?
If we look at all the sicknesses and we categorize them into 5 categories, one way to categorize all sicknesses is category 1, sicknesses coming from physical events. Say you go out into the market, a car bumps into you and a bone is broken. A purely physical event leads to suffering, a medical problem. Second category would be, say somebody is born without one hand. It's a genetic issue. So the first category was category of physical events. Second category is genetic category. Suffering coming from genetic category. Third, let us say, is because of infection, like COVID, like pneumonia. That because of some virus, some bacteria, some fungus, some pathogen, sickness comes about. So third category of sickness, pathogen driven. Fourth category of sickness would be the diet and lifestyle driven sicknesses, which disturb metabolism in the long run, leading to chronic sicknesses. And the fifth category would be sicknesses arising from repressed emotions somatizing themselves in the body, where body becomes more like the computer monitor and the CPU actually is the emotional processing system which displays on the monitor chronic sicknesses. And many of the autoimmune sicknesses will fall in this category. If we look at these 5 categories of sicknesses, and obviously this is the rainbow of suffering, some scholars say in each category, different pathy is stronger. Disclaimer being, in any category, if we go to the acute emergency situation, allopathy always is the best. But short of it, some scholars believe that in general, allopathy is very good in physical event related sicknesses and pathogenic sicknesses. When it comes to genetic sicknesses, no pathy actually has much to offer. Like if somebody is born without a hand, we don't know of any pathy which can make the hand grow. Ayurveda, some scholars believe, is very good in diet and lifestyle category. And homeopathy is very good in the category where sicknesses are somatizations of repressed emotions. Now, if we look today, almost 70% of sicknesses fall in the emotionally driven and diet and lifestyle driven category. And they are the most chronic and one of the most costliest. So it is of interest not only to the individual but also to governments across the world how to lower down the medical costs of the society. And there we see that in emotionally driven sicknesses, homeopathy has great potential at a very low cost, very low relapse and very low side effects. Homeopathy also is an area where it is very easy to find new medicines compared to allopathy, where it is so difficult to find any new blockbuster drug. And homeopathy is very cheap and it can be taught also very easily. And therefore, the scaling up on a global scale, while driving costs down by almost 75%, relapse and side effects by another 75%, it's a golden opportunity. Now, the difficulty in homeopathy is this. The difficulty is how to find the right medicine and how to prevent aggravation. Those are the core difficulties of homeopathy. At this point, there are many approaches in homeopathy how to do it. One approach is to look at the materia medica and the repertory. Second approach is to combine it with the approach of kingdoms. The third approach is to look at the miasms. The fourth approach is to look at the genus and the subclass of the source remedy. And the fifth is to look at the superclass, which is one of the more recent approaches, so to say. Now, if we put all of this together, they believe the remedy selection becomes slightly easier and more accurate. We can add to this a psychoanalytic approach to understanding of the person and refining further the search for remedy, and in some approximate way modeling the aggravation. Now that is where the promise of interface comes in. That at the two critical points of homeopathy, remedy selection and aggravation, if we combine psychoanalysis and homeopathy, there is a possibility of advance. Will it happen or not? Time will tell, but I see great potential for advance, a great promise for advance. So this is the core reason why the intersection is so important and so promising. Secondly, if we bring the two together, both of them can benefit from each other in variety of ways. Let me first go into how homeopathy can benefit from psychotherapy. First, the learning of typology, that both homeopathy and psychotherapy, knowingly, unknowingly, use the concept of typology. Like if we are looking at dependent personality types, and then you can divide them further into dependent personality with core difficulty of decision making versus dependent personality with core difficulty of detachment versus dependent with hidden narcissism. And you can have a subtypes of dependent personality disorders. So that kind of thing both of us do, and we can actually learn and borrow each other's typology to complete our own. It is one operational benefit even without doing any conceptual development, as it is now, on an as is where is basis. Second is to look at standardized tests, that you give a medicine to somebody, does not work, and a medicine you feel should not work starts working, which means something is not there in the case history. That can be made good by giving a standardized test to the person. That in the case history, you don't find anything related to guilt and envy, but when you give the standardized test to the person, envy comes up very high but repressed. So it allows you to have a much better picture of the person's mind using the tests. The second part. The third important element is mutual enrichment and problem solving. And if you look at what psychotherapy gets from homeopathy, a lot of things. One, resistant patients. Second, patients who are having reactions or difficulties with allopathic medications. Third, who cannot afford the cost, time, and effort. Fourth, who cannot face their own emotions. Fifth, who want a passive healing approach rather than an active healing approach. Sixth, typology. And seventh, support when we require something where something is not acute but just on the borderline. In all those areas, there is a lot that psychotherapy will get from homeopathy. And lastly, something is very important, which is a philosophical aspect, that homeopathy is a phenomenological system, where psychotherapy, any school you take, by and large, is a causality driven system. Now, it's always mutually enriching if you bring together a phenomenological system and a causality driven system. It's necessary to make a point here that any phenomenological system has two advantages. One is it customizes to a large variety of individuals. And two, it is based upon pure data and less of inferences. It's very versatile, it's easy to learn and apply, it's very open. Those are the advantages. The difficulties are two. One is it is always seen as a soft science, not as a hard science. And second, it is always a compromise. Nobody wants a phenomenological system where you cannot explain the causality. You accept it as it is, as a compromise, because there is an insurmountable wall in front of. But ultimately, the final ambition always is to turn causal and go into a causality-based system. So this is where it can help. My feeling is that unlike some who believe that homeopathy can directly go and become can be understood in empirical terms, I feel it will be a two-step process. First, causality will be understood in conceptual psychological terms and then in empirical terms, biological empirical terms. So if we take this step of understanding first in psychological terms, that becomes an intermediate state before one can get into the empirical understanding of how it works and what is in process. So all these things, they lead us to a very promise of a very fruitful interface between homeopathy and psychotherapy, and where I see not only prospect but great prospect is the timing today. Because in homeopathy, they have come to the approach of the superclass. Now, superclass, if you look, it's a different name for deeper dynamic. And dynamic is what psychoanalysis always is dealing with. So they have divided all patients and remedies into 6 superclass. Now, that is saying 6 core dynamics.
Okay.
Now, my feeling is this will actually go up to not less than 15 to 25. Either you will have to add superclasses or you will have to subdivide the superclasses. And I also feel the name of the superclasses also will undergo a change. And the reason is that if you are going to the dynamic, then psychoanalysis has been into this business of dynamics for more than a century now. So if we look at the core psychoanalytic mechanisms which underlie psychological sicknesses, which either manifest as psychological sicknesses or somatize in the body, then we are looking at approximately 25 core psychoanalytic mechanisms, maybe 30, but something around that figure. And if you reduce it further, it won't come at any day at less than 15.
Okay.
Now you can have elemental mechanisms leading to those operational mechanisms. That's a different thing altogether. That may go more ontological and less in quantity, and you can actually come down to 5 or 7. But operationally speaking, I believe we will be somewhere around 15 in terms of the core dynamic operations, the core dynamics. And this gives me a lot of promise that the time for the interface has come. So this leads me to our discussion that the time, perhaps what Victor Hugo used to say, time for an idea has come.
You said something about causality-based homeopathy. Can we dive deeper into that?
If we look into homeopathy, the first causality-based concept which came in was that of miasm, where people got grouped into 3. Otherwise, everyone was an individual. So homeopathy was counting on the differences and uniqueness, not so much on the commonality. Miasm brings in that element of commonality. If you go further, the kingdom concept again brings in, the genus concept again brings in. And now the superclass concept brings in that element of dynamic causality. So we see this movement from materia medica to superclass as a soft movement from phenomenology to causality.
Right.
And if you look at the actual operation of homeopathy, many times you see that when you just go by the phenomenological approach, something does not work. In many cases, it just works as it is, but many times it does not work. In difficult cases, it does not work. So then you go miasmatic. Let us say that also is not giving you the result. Then you go the kingdom approach or some other approach. Now, the core there is that if you have found the right remedy and if the concepts are right, then it is like looking at the center of the room where the remedy is situated from 5 different windows. The window of materia medica and repertory, the window of miasms, the window of kingdoms, the window of subclasses, the window of superclasses. And whatever window you look, you come to the same remedy. Now, this is the ideal that they say. Now, you can add one more window here, that of psychoanalysis. And you can further add one more window of heat. And if all of that leads to the same thing, then the probability that we are on the right track will be very high. And that solves the core problem, as we said. And the core problem, if you can solve or even solve by 25%, the benefit to the community will be at least 50%.
True.
It will go into benefiting millions of people. We are not talking of hundreds and thousands. It will be millions and crores of people benefited. And therefore, this conceptual point is very important. Because the applied, multiplied quantum of effect in the society of this conceptual problem being solved is very large. It's worth investing time into. Because the benefit to humanity is so large if we can even solve it by 25%. Now, another part comes in of causality-based homeopathy in a slightly different way. And that is, in psychoanalysis, we say there is a core trauma. And then there are focus demanding traumas. It is like there is a core trauma, and because of the core trauma, the person has interacted with the world, and because he could not interact in a good way, other small traumas have been created.
Right.
And it is like the root leading to the branch, to the branches, to the leaves. And we realize two things in psychotherapy, that the safest way is to go from the leaf to the branch, to the trunk, to the root. If you straightway try to go to the root, the aggravation is very high. Number one. Number two, there may be some branches in the way that unless you solve the branches, you cannot solve the root. Even though you know the solution to the root. But the moment you apply the solution to the root, it leads to aggravation. Because something in between is demanding your focus, and unless that is solved, you cannot go to the root. Now, Freud talked about the central masturbatory fantasy. And if you can enlarge that term, you can enlarge it to central fantasies. That there may be one or more of central fantasies, central dynamics. And then you have secondarily important dynamics, sub-central dynamics, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
So it will be like, let us take an example. A person has an early life object loss. He develops a personality disorder. The behavior of the parents creates another line of difficulty and fortifies it, adds a few more things. He goes out into the world and again there is a problem and that adds a few more things. Now, let us say you have a remedy for early life object loss, which is straight at the root. Apply that remedy and instead of healing, you get aggravation.
Right.
When all other criteria are being satisfied. And that can be, I'm not saying always is, but can be that because the intermediate things are not solved and you have to come top down in this particular case, and there will be many of this type, that unless you solve those intermediate things, you cannot directly go to the core.
And it's very similar to the Freudian concept, great interpretation, and the therapy ended. Because when we are too quick to address the root cause while the preparation is not fully done,
exactly,
it can lead.
Exactly. Very well said. It's exactly this. Great interpretation and the therapy ended. In medicine, often they say the operation was successful and the patient died. That you asked me to do X, that was very successful. After 2 days, if he develops Y infection and he goes, that's not my lookout. So after 3 days, if I write the report, I will say the operation was successful and the patient died. So that's the difficulty of being reductionist. So this then leads us to the point that if we are going to look at the core psychoanalytic dynamic and the intermediary psychoanalytic traumas and dynamics, then one would be to find remedies which first deal with the intermediate and then come to the root. And if the root is refractory, then how to mellow it down. The second component will be of finding substances which deal with the core mechanism rather than accompanying other specifics. So if we can find, because the point there is that if in the potentialized form, we have substances which when potentialized can lead to this phenomenological outcome, why should nature not have kept substances which if potentialized can heal the causal mechanisms? If they are healing causal mechanisms in the midst of a phenomenological picture, there would be some substances, it's very likely, that they would be dealing only with the psychoanalytic mechanisms and less with the other specifics of the individual. So that search then becomes very important. And the good part is that the area of material science is very fertile. We have millions and billions of materials to be tried. And it's highly probabilistic that at least we'll find a few, and we don't need more than 25. We may have made, till today, human beings may have made 25 million materials, and out of that, at least 2.5 billion, I would say. And out of 2.5 billion, we are looking only at 25. It's not unlikely that such materials exist, which, when potentialized, can help us directly heal the core mechanisms. So this causality-driven potentialized homeopathy becomes one more interesting area, apart from adding one more window to search in the intersection. So first, as I said, was there can be operational benefits of using the tests, of looking at the typology, if looking at the intermediate dynamics, the core dynamic. The second is to add it as a window in remedy selection. Third is to use it for rough modeling of aggravation. And fourth would be to look at substances which, when potentialized, act on the fundamental psychoanalytic mechanisms. And this is where the great promise is, because that will fundamentally alter, even if we don't understand how that remedy works, which nobody understands at present. How a homeopathic remedy works, empirically speaking, we can at least understand psychologically what complexes it is curing. Like next time we will take up the periodic table of homeopathy. Okay, how homeopathy looks at the periodic table and how psychoanalysis can be brought in. And it's something very interesting. If you look at the whole periodic table remedies, the mineral remedies. So homeopathy looks at the plant remedies, animal remedies, and mineral remedies. Meaning, animal remedies, you take some part of an animal body and potentialize it. Those are called animal remedies. The plant remedy, you pick up any plant, take up any part and potentialize it. And in mineral, you take up those mineral substances and potentialize it. And they have produced very different results in human bodies. It's very interesting. Okay, we are not looking at an ad hoc situation. We are looking at some definite pattern, some law is in operation, which means that there is some aspect of design of nature that we are encountering. We are not able to read the language completely at present, but there is definitely an unsung song there, which science has to decipher and learn to hear. The important component here is this, that if you look at the mineral kingdom, the periodic table mineral kingdom, psychoanalytically speaking, we are essentially looking at the pre-Oedipal causations. If you look at the animal kingdom, we are looking largely at the Oedipal causation. So in psychotherapy, we many times say the Oedipal stage problems and the pre-Oedipal stage problems. So the mineral remedies by and large are pre-Oedipal stage problems. Now these pre-Oedipal stage problems in Kohut's language relate to the formation of self. And in Margaret Mather's language, they lead to the problems of fusion individuation. And if they lead to a difficulty of the Oedipal type that we find, let us say, in the somebody, let us say, has a difficulty of working. He finds the competition too much. He is just broken by the competition. Now we say it's an Oedipally driven difficulty. That he is finding it difficult to compete and is finding it difficult to negotiate the world of three or more. He is essentially having some phallic issue, psychologically speaking. Now that can be because the Oedipus was problematic, nothing else before it was problematic, or that can be because the pre-Oedipal difficulty led to the Oedipal difficulty. Now if he has, you can also take the example of more pathological type. Let us say somebody has an OCD. And the OCD is rooted in the Oedipus. Now there are two possibilities. Everything was right till the Oedipus and something went wrong. Or there was already a split problem and which predispose the person to an Oedipal problem. And then the OCD develops. OCD can develop both ways. If the OCD was to develop without a pre-Oedipal pathology, the problem will go into the animal kingdom. According to our understanding, we don't know what the truth is, but this is what conceptual deduction
It appears to be.
leads us to it. And if it is related to the pre-Oedipal problem leading to the Oedipal problem, leading to the OCD, then the mineral remedy will work.
Right.
Because the pre-Oedipal is mineral. And if we are looking at a fundamental process issue of high sensitivity and lack of ego strength to coordinate that high life energy, then we are looking at a plant remedy. Because there the problem is of affect generation and affect control. It's essentially a difficulty of high affect generation and low affect control. In our language, we'll call it a ego strength issue. High sensitivity and low ego strength issue. So it's very interesting to see, and with the advent of superclass, slowly I think what we have been saying, at least I have been saying for many years, the causality should be brought in, at least conceptually, to see how it turns. I think the periodic table and the advent of the superclass is taking us very near to the space of intersection, confluence, and synergy between homeopathy and psychotherapy.
So
it's nearing time. Should we continue the second part?
Yes, sir. So we continue the rest in part 2 of the same.